Hi everyone, welcome to week 6 of English97. So we are actually going to spend one more week with Essay 1. I'm in the process of just making some little adjustments to our course. So right now on our syllabus, you'll notice that there are 3 essays described for our course, and I've decided to actually cut that down to 2. So we're going to spend one more week with Essay 1 and do a little editing and sort of dig into these just a little bit more before we start our second essay. And I think that you'll like this change because actually it will make a lot less work for you, and that way you'll have 2 really good essays when we finish the semester for your portfolio. So this week we're going to talk about editing a little bit, and then I will post an updated schedule for you all this week just so you can kind of see where those changes will be made. But don't worry, it's not going to be any more work for you. It'll probably take a little weight off. So let's talk about week 6. A couple assignments this week should be familiar by now, I hope. I'm going to have some reading. We're going to do chapter 11 of Use What Works, and then also a short couple-page article called Good Writers Always Follow My Rules. Don't be fooled by the title. It's kind of about how good writers don't follow all the rules. And then we'll have a quiz on those that I'd like you to do by Thursday. Then we'll have a discussion board on editing and discussing the idea of whether we should have what's called a standard English, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I would love to see an edited version of your Essay 1 by next Monday. So we're going to talk today about what editing is and what it isn't, and your readings as well. Chapter 11 of Use What Works especially goes over some common errors in standard English that you might want to look for as you edit this week. So I'm really excited for your Essay 1 draft so far. They've been super cool, super inspiring and heartbreaking at times and funny, and I'm just really, proud of the work that you guys have done so far. We worked on revising last week, which is a little different than editing, so let's talk about that first. So revising, as you can kind of see by this Venn diagram, revision is what we did last week, making your writing sort of sound better in a way. This is adding, changing, deleting, kind of working on your introduction, making sure your thesis is clear, organizing your ideas, and this is everything that we focused on in week 5. Week 6, we're going to kind of shift and focus more on this editing part, the idea that you want to make your writing look better, but also in a way sound clearer and more distinct to your reader. So this is where we're going to focus on capitalization, correcting spelling, looking at your paragraphs, changing your punctuation. This is all based on the idea that editing is looking for the correctness of your language. But before we do this week, I do want to also ask you guys, who decides what is correct? Think about that for a second. Is it me? As your instructor, do I decide what's right and what's wrong? Is it our government? Is it you as a writer? Is it writers that have come before us deciding that this is the kind of good way to write? This is a question that your readings will focus on this week as well. This chapter of Use What Works talks about editing for correctness and the idea that you want to be accurate with the way that you write. And this is an area of writing that many, many, many people struggle with and also feel very bad about. A lot of people, when I ask them how they feel about writing, they're like, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to use a comma. And I'll say, well, that doesn't mean you're not a writer. It just means that you struggle with commas, But I understand that there's just a lot of embarrassment and a lot of fear that comes with editing. So I want to take a step back and kind of talk about why that is and how we can kind of make that easier if editing is something that's really hard for you. So one of the readings for this week is also a clip from Do You Speak American? So this is an older documentary, but it was made by a newscaster who just went around the US talking to people about how they use language and how they speak American. And, while you're watching this clip, I want you to kind of ask yourself some things. What dialect of English do you speak at home? What about in school? How about at your job? And why do you use that English wherever you are? In this video, they mention African American English and I think Chicano English as well. but people who are multilingual and speak maybe Spanish at home or French at home or a different language at home may speak a different dialect of English as well. In Missouri, Illinois, the middle of the U.S. area, we call it the Midlands. And in the Midlands, we speak a certain type of English. But if you go down to Texas, in more southern states, they might speak a different type of English. So I want to talk about those dialects and how that's completely normal. And I just want you to think about whether you feel we should have a standard or not. Because, sometimes if you speak, say you speak African American English at home, which many of you probably do, and then you get to school where you're being asked to speak standard English, that might be hard for you. That might be hard to transition and hard to learn and difficult to keep right in your mind, So I think it's important to talk about where these Englishes come from and also where the standards come from. My view is that standard English is necessary in some respects to make sure that we all understand each other. But I want to encourage you to use whatever English you are comfortable with in your writing, as long as your reader can understand the meaning you're trying to convey and it's not by mistake. Then I want you to write in a way that you're comfortable with. I don't want you to feel like you have to sound like a linguist or a doctor or someone that you're not, because I want you to sound like you. And many of you are doing that already, and that's why I wanted to kind of bring this conversation up this week. So your readings are also going to talk about some common errors. I have a few here that often come up in standard American English, especially if you speak or write in a different dialect at home. So these are errors that can impact your message and can make it difficult to understand your point. That's why I want you to focus on these specifically. So several that your book is going to talk about are sentence fragments, like this here, who had been sitting in their seats. The problem here is that we don't know who had been sitting in their seats. We're missing a subject here. This is a very common thing I see in some people's writing. Run-on sentences, you may have heard me or seen me mention these in your writing. But for example, they have her email account was hacked on Monday. 2 days later, her Twitter account was also hacked. What the problem is here is this is actually two ideas. Her email account was hacked on Monday. That's one sentence. And 2 days later, her Twitter account was also hacked. We need to separate these with a period. So run-ons happen when you're kind of squishing two ideas together without proper punctuation. And then I've also got an example of subject-verb agreement here, and also pronoun use. So I do also want to say that pronoun use and subject-verb agreement, the errors here are actually not errors in African American English. So, for example, this sentence here, he need to be back before the concert. If I write that in my paper and I want to use standard English, this is a mistake. But if I'm talking to someone in my house and I'm wanting to use African American English, it's not a mistake. So really, this is a good example of where you want to think about which dialect might be most effective. If you're quoting someone and they said this to you and you want to include it in your story, then you don't need to change it. So just keep that in mind. And the same thing with this pronoun use here. But the pronoun use really is kind of talking about how they use she several times, and it can get confusing if you mean the friend or the person, the sales clerk. So hopefully doing the reading this week will help kind of identify and work on these errors. But I do want to make it clear that, you don't need to be perfect, and that, what one person might consider an error is not actually an error. And that's something that I'm excited to discuss with you guys in our discussion board. So if you really do struggle with editing, these are some tips that I feel like will help. See if you can read your writing out loud. You can also have your computer or a friend read it to you. Make a list of common mistakes that you make and teach yourself how to fix them. So if I tell you that I see a lot of run-on sentences, I want you just to see if you can figure out how to fix those. Don't worry about all the other errors, because those are for another time. And, ultimately just focus on one mistake at a time. Oh, excuse me. And then lastly, I wanted to kind of end with a quote from a linguist named ENG97IN1. He is a researcher and works as a writing instructor. And his focus is on particularly anti-racist teaching. So he says in a recent blog post that people are never satisfied with how language worked yesterday. We keep finding new ways to do it today. New things and experiences pop up that urge us to change it tomorrow. And so we all be languaging or conventioning. We make new sense out of old and new words in our continually evolving places with the people we find around us. We mess with language all the time. We bend it, even break it. We make it work for us, even as it works on us. And this is the idea that I want you guys to keep in mind, either in my class or other, language classes that you are in, that there are quote unquote rules that we have for standard English, but how you choose to use them in your writing is up to you. So I can kind of guide you and give you some advice on using standard English, but I do not want to discount the importance of other dialects that you speak and that you know, and that those have absolutely as much importance in your writing as any other. All right, so good luck editing, and I will talk to you soon.